That day in court was expected to be ordinary. Just another busy docket, another hearing where Judge Judy's sharp questions would cut through weak excuses, nervous lies, and empty explanations. The audience had gathered like they always did, whispering among themselves, waiting for the woman whose authority had become famous far beyond any courtroom. For decades, Judge Judy had stood as a symbol of control, experience, and fearless judgment. She did not wear her years in law like decoration. She carried them like a weapon. But on this particular day, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, tighter, almost waiting for something to explode. No one in that room could have known that a single insult from one loud heckler would spark a confrontation so intense that it would become a lesson in respect, credibility, and earned authority. The woman called herself Karen. She was loud, rude, and shamelessly theatrical. She was the kind of person who enjoyed attention more than truth, the kind who interrupted others just to feel important. People already knew her for her sneers, her sarcasm, and her habit of trying to pull others down. But even for Karen, what she said next crossed a line, with a loud, mocking laugh. She leaned forward and looked directly toward Judge Judy. Then, in a voice filled with disrespect, she said the words that froze the entire courtroom. "That law degree of yours doesn't mean much, does it? Anybody can wave around a piece of paper. That doesn't make you smarter than the rest of us." The reaction was instant. A gasp moved through the room like glass breaking on the floor. People turned toward each other in disbelief, unsure if they had truly heard what had just been said. Had this woman really dismissed Judge Judy's entire career? Had she reduced decades of courtroom battles, legal decisions, public trust, and earned respect to nothing more than a paper certificate? Karen's words were not just rude. They were an attack on credibility itself. She was not only insulting a degree, she was trying to weaken authority, mock experience, and challenge the very foundation of what the courtroom represented. For a moment, everything stopped. The audience waited. The cameras seemed to hold still. Every lens focused on the woman behind the bench. Judge Judy did not react. She did not rush to defend herself. She did not shout. She did not even blink. Instead, she sat perfectly still, letting silence do what anger never could. Her eyes locked onto Karen. And in that pause, the whole room felt something shift. It was not fear. It was not weakness. It was control. The kind of control that comes before a storm. Then Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. Her voice was calm, steady, and sharp enough to cut through the tension. She did not treat Karen's insult as merely personal. She exposed it as something bigger. Arrogance pretending to be intelligence. Disrespect pretending to be honesty. Noise pretending to be truth. She reminded the courtroom that her law degree was not the source of her power. It was only the door she had walked through. What had truly built her authority were the thousands of cases she had faced, the countless decisions she had made, the lives touched by her rulings, and the years she had spent placing truth above convenience. But even then, Judge Judy did not unleash everything, not yet. She gave just enough to remind Karen who she was dealing with, but held back enough to make everyone understand that the real response was still coming. Karen smirked, mistaking restraint for weakness. But that was her first mistake. Judge Judy had faced arrogance many times before. She understood timing. She knew how to let someone speak long enough to trap themselves inside their own pride. This was no longer just about a law degree. This was about whether mockery could erase earned respect. The audience leaned forward, feeling the tension rise. They were not simply watching an argument. They were watching arrogance step into the path of experience. And once Judge Judy began, Karen would not be able to stop what was coming. The tension inside the courtroom continued to grow heavier with every passing second. Karen still wore that smug expression on her face, convinced she had managed to shake a woman whose entire reputation had been built on authority and confidence. But what Karen failed to realize was that silence can sometimes carry far more power than shouting ever could. Judge Judy remained completely calm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't trade insults. She simply watched Karen with the kind of patience that only comes from decades of experience. Meanwhile, everyone else in the room understood that this moment had become far bigger than a simple exchange of words. If Karen's insult went unanswered, it would not stay trapped inside that courtroom. Cameras were rolling. Reporters were writing notes. Millions of people would eventually watch the footage and decide for themselves whether authority had just been weakened or defended. That was the real pressure hanging over the room. Judge Judy's entire career represented more than television fame. It represented years of discipline, legal battles, and earned credibility. Karen's attack was not simply aimed at one woman. It symbolized every arrogant voice that had ever mocked education, dismissed hard work, or tried to tear down someone successful simply because their authority made others uncomfortable. If Karen's mockery succeeded, the message would spread quickly. That arrogance could overpower experience. That noise could silence truth. That mockery mattered more than mastery. But Judge Judy understood something Karen did not. Moments like these are not won through anger. They are won through control. And if she responded correctly, people would not remember Karen's insult. They would remember Judy's answer. The room remained tense as everyone waited to see which direction the confrontation would take. Millions watching beyond those courtroom walls were not just waiting for drama. They were waiting for proof. Proof that experience still carried meaning. Proof that integrity still mattered. Proof that authority earned through truth could survive even the loudest disrespect. For Judge Judy, this was more than another courtroom exchange. It was a test of whether the voice that had made her legendary still carried the same weight it always had. For Karen, it was a gamble she did not yet realize she had already lost. And for the audience, this was becoming something unforgettable. Karen leaned back in her chair confidently, crossing her arms with a grin that practically challenged anyone to push back against her. She truly believed she had landed a powerful blow. Whispers moved through the crowd. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others stared silently, waiting for Judge Judy's response. But Judy still did not rush. Instead, she slowly placed her pen down on the bench. The small clicking sound echoed through the silent courtroom like a judge's gavel striking wood. That single movement alone shifted the energy in the room. Karen used loudness. Judge Judy used composure. Then finally, without anger or emotion, Judy began to speak. "So," she said calmly, "you believe a degree is just paper?" Her voice was measured and precise, carrying the weight of years spent inside real courtrooms. "You think it's simply decoration," she continued. "Something meaningless." Then she looked directly at Karen. "Let me explain something to you about mine." The entire courtroom leaned in. Judge Judy did not brag. She did not exaggerate. She simply spoke with facts. She described the long nights spent studying law while others slept, the years spent fighting difficult cases, the pressure, sacrifice, and persistence required to stand in courtrooms where real people's lives depended on justice being done correctly. She explained that her law degree had never been a trophy hanging on a wall. It had been a tool shaped through real battles, tested through years of conflict, sharpened by experience, and strengthened every single time justice mattered more than convenience. Karen's smirk began to weaken slightly. Judge Judy had taken the insult and transformed it into something completely different. Karen tried to reduce everything to a sheet of paper. Judy turned it into a story about discipline, struggle, and earned authority. But she still wasn't finished. Judge Judy leaned forward again, her tone becoming sharper, though still perfectly controlled. "You see," she said calmly, "the value of a lawyer is not found in a diploma sitting inside a frame." Her eyes stayed locked on Karen. "It is found in what that diploma accomplishes in the real world." The room became completely silent again. "My degree," Judy continued, "has stood beside people who needed justice when nobody else would stand beside them. That is what gives it meaning. That is what gives it weight." Even the reporters stopped writing for a moment. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, tapping her fingers against the table as though trying to hide the fact that Judge Judy's words were beginning to hit harder than expected. Karen had anticipated anger, maybe defensiveness, maybe a shouting match. Instead, Judge Judy answered with conviction, clarity, and truth, and that made the response impossible to dismiss. The first phase of the confrontation had ended. Karen threw an insult like a weapon. Judge Judy calmly caught it, broke it apart, and turned it into a lesson. And everyone in that courtroom could feel the balance beginning to shift. The atmosphere inside the courtroom had reached a boiling point. Karen could feel the room slowly turning against her, but instead of backing down, she leaned forward once again, raising her voice as if volume alone could restore control. "All that talking still doesn't change the truth," she snapped. "Your degree is still just paper. Anybody can claim authority. That doesn't make you better than everyone else." This time, however, the insult no longer carried the same confidence. It sounded desperate. And Judge Judy immediately recognized it. She did not flinch. She did not blink. Instead, she focused on Karen with the same calm precision that had destroyed countless arguments inside courtrooms for decades. Then she spoke. "You're right about one thing," Judy said quietly. The audience froze. A piece of paper alone means absolutely nothing. Karen's expression briefly brightened, believing she had finally cornered her opponent, but Judge Judy continued before Karen could react. "When that paper represents decades spent defending justice, when it has protected families, defended rights, and held dishonest people accountable, then it stops being paper." Her voice became firmer. It becomes proof of purpose. The room erupted into murmurs. Reporters immediately began scribbling notes again, while audience members leaned closer, fully aware they were witnessing a moment that would soon spread far beyond the courtroom walls. Judge Judy pressed forward without hesitation. "If you believe mocking my degree somehow weakens me," she said calmly, "then you misunderstand something very important." She pointed lightly toward the bench. "You are not exposing me today." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You are exposing yourself." The silence that followed felt enormous. "In this courtroom," Judy continued, "authority is not created by arrogance. It is earned through truth." Karen's smug smile disappeared completely. For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty crossed her face. Judge Judy had done more than defend herself. She had taken complete control of the room. For several seconds, Karen remained quiet, blinking as if trying to recover from the weight of Judy's words. But arrogance rarely understands when to stop. With a dismissive laugh, she tried once more to attack. "You talk like you're some kind of hero," Karen sneered. "Real lawyers from top schools don't rely on emotional speeches and theatrics. They rely on intellect." Then she gestured mockingly toward Judy. "You just argue with emotion." A wave of gasps swept across the courtroom again. Karen clearly hoped the accusation would shift the momentum back in her favor by portraying Judge Judy as emotional rather than professional. But instead, it only revealed how desperate she had become. Judge Judy leaned back slightly and allowed Karen's words to hang in the air for several seconds before answering. "Emotion?" Judy repeated calmly. She let the words sit in silence before continuing. "No," she said firmly. "What I argue with is reality." The room instantly quieted again. "The law is not some debate competition held inside ivory towers," Judy continued. "It is a lifeline for people whose lives would collapse if nobody defended them." Her voice grew stronger. "I have stood in courtrooms where families faced eviction. I have ruled on cases where fairness determined whether someone lost everything or walked away with dignity." She leaned forward. "That is not emotion." A pause. "That is humanity." The audience stirred with approval. "And if you believe humanity has no place inside the law," Judy added sharply, "then you do not understand the law at all." Karen's face tightened immediately. "You think your so-called humanity makes you superior to everyone else," she snapped angrily. "It's easy to hide behind emotional stories when you don't have the prestige or education to support your arguments." The attack landed with bitterness, but Judy remained completely unshaken. Education, Judge Judy answered immediately, is not defined by the building where you studied. She paused deliberately. It is defined by what you choose to do after you leave it. The room became silent once more. There are people with prestigious degrees who spend their lives protecting power, she continued. And there are people with ordinary degrees who spend their lives protecting justice. Then came the question that shifted everything. Tell me honestly, Judy said calmly. Which one matters more? Karen opened her mouth slightly, searching desperately for an answer that never came. The audience already knew it. Judge Judy had completely redirected the argument away from prestige and arrogance and placed it directly on purpose and integrity. But she still wasn't done. Her voice grew even steadier, every sentence landing with absolute certainty. A law degree is not a trophy, she said. It is not armor for arrogance. She pointed lightly toward herself. It is a responsibility. Then toward Karen. Mine has spent years working for justice, not for applause, not for attention, not for headlines. A pause filled the room. Can you honestly say the same about what you've done? The silence afterward was devastating. Karen opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Everyone could see it now. The audience, the reporters, even the cameras. Arrogance had finally collided with truth, and truth was winning. Yet Karen, stubborn to the end, forced out one final bitter laugh. You think you've won because the audience likes you. She sneered weakly. This is just entertainment. Judge Judy leaned forward slowly one final time. Her eyes never left Karen. No, she said firmly. This is not entertainment. The room held its breath. This is a reminder. Her voice cut through the silence like thunder. A reminder that respect must be earned, not mocked. That justice must be lived, not performed. And no matter how loud arrogance becomes. She paused. Truth will always speak louder. The courtroom erupted into applause. Karen had doubled down repeatedly. But every attack only pushed her deeper into collapse. Judge Judy had transformed a simple insult into something much larger. A lesson about integrity, purpose, and why arrogance will always fail when confronted by truth. The applause continued echoing through the courtroom, but Judge Judy did not allow the reaction to distract her. She didn't smile proudly. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she remained perfectly calm, sitting with the steady composure of someone who had survived far greater storms than this one. Her eyes stayed fixed on Karen, patient and controlled, carrying the quiet confidence of a person who understood that real authority never needs to shout. Karen, however, was still unwilling to surrender. Lifting her chin defiantly, she forced herself to speak again as though the audience's reaction had not shaken her confidence. You can keep talking all you want, she scoffed bitterly, but none of it changes reality. You hide behind your so-called experience. Her voice grew sharper. If you were truly great, you would have gone to the best schools, worked beside the most elite lawyers, argued the biggest cases. Then came the insult she hoped would reclaim control. But you didn't, Karen sneered. You're just a television judge who thinks her degree makes her important. The attack sounded sharp on the surface, but underneath it, everyone could hear the desperation. Even the audience recognized it immediately. The murmurs spreading through the room were no longer uncertain whispers. They were reactions of disbelief toward Karen herself. She was no longer controlling the confrontation. She was unraveling inside it. Judge Judy remained calm. Then slowly, almost gently, she leaned forward. Do you know what truly gives a degree power? She asked quietly. The courtroom immediately fell silent again. It is not the name printed on the university building, Judy continued. It is not prestige. It is not the shine of a framed diploma hanging on a wall. Her voice strengthened. It is the justice created through it. Every word landed heavily. My degree has protected families from losing their homes, she said. It has defended people without power. It has reminded dishonest individuals that nobody stands above accountability. Then she paused briefly. That, she said firmly, is what gives it value. Karen's expression tightened. Judge Judy had completely reframed the argument once again. This was no longer about famous schools, expensive diplomas, or prestige. It had become a conversation about purpose itself. And in that moment, Judy was no longer simply defending herself. She was speaking for every hardworking student who had ever been told they were not impressive enough, every lawyer who had been dismissed because they lacked elite connections, every person who had been underestimated by arrogant people obsessed with status. The cameras zoomed closer toward her face. The reporters wrote faster than ever. Already realizing they were recording the exact moment that would dominate headlines across the country, Judge Judy continued. If your definition of greatness depends only on prestige, she said sharply, then you fundamentally misunderstand justice. Her eyes remained locked onto Karen. The law does not live inside marble buildings or elite institutions. A pause. It lives in the lives of ordinary people. The room remained completely still. It lives in the tenant who keeps her home because someone defended her rights. It lives in the worker whose voice was finally heard. It lives in the child who receives fairness because the law stood beside them instead of abandoning them. Her voice deepened. That is where the law breathes. Then came the blow that shattered the room. That, Judy declared, is where my degree has lived. She leaned forward slightly more. Now, tell me, Karen. The silence became unbearable. Where has yours lived? The question hit with devastating force. Karen froze instantly. Her mouth opened slightly, but no answer came. The smirk that once carried her confidence had completely disappeared. And the silence that followed was not merely awkward anymore. It was crushing. Judge Judy allowed the silence to stretch deliberately, exposing the emptiness behind Karen's arrogance. Then she delivered what became the defining statement of the entire confrontation. If your degree teaches you to defend power without questioning it, she said slowly, then it becomes nothing more than a shield protecting privilege. The room held its breath. But if my degree teaches me to stand beside the powerless, she paused, then it becomes a sword for justice. Her voice sharpened one final time, and I will always choose the sword. The courtroom exploded. Gasps. Applause, even cheers, broke out, despite repeated attempts from moderators to restore order. Judge Judy's words had gone beyond debate. They had become a declaration. A reminder that the true measure of authority is not prestige, but purpose. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her face flushed red. Her hands trembled slightly as she searched desperately for another response, but none came. Her earlier confidence had collapsed completely. For the first time since the confrontation began, the courtroom no longer saw Karen as a bold critic. They saw someone destroyed by her own arrogance. Meanwhile, Judge Judy simply leaned back calmly in her chair. She did not celebrate. She did not gloat. She allowed the truth itself to carry the moment. And it did. Because everyone inside that courtroom understood they had witnessed something far bigger than a simple argument. They had watched arrogance dismantled by conviction. Outside the courtroom walls, the impact had already begun. Video clips would spread across television networks and social media within hours. Headlines would repeat the defining line again and again: a shield for privilege or a sword for justice. But inside that courtroom, the outcome was already final. Respect had been restored, authority had been reaffirmed, and Karen had been left with nothing except the hollow echo of her own mockery. Even after the courtroom settled down, the energy from Judge Judy's words continued hanging in the air like thunder after a storm. The applause slowly faded. The whispers quieted. But the impact of the confrontation remained impossible to ignore. Judge Judy sat calmly behind the bench, composed and steady, while Karen remained frozen in silence, unable to recover from the collapse of her own arrogance. The contrast between the two women had become undeniable. Karen had entered the courtroom believing loud mockery could weaken authority. Judge Judy had answered without rage, without panic, and without losing control for even a second. That difference changed everything. Karen tried once more to hold on to whatever confidence she had left. She straightened slightly in her chair and forced out a bitter scoff. "So that's it?" she muttered weakly. "Everyone claps for you, and suddenly you think you've proven something," but even Karen herself no longer sounded convinced. Judge Judy looked toward her calmly. "No," she replied softly. "The applause proves nothing." The room fell silent once again. "What matters," Judy continued, "is whether people leave this room understanding something they didn't understand before." She paused. "That respect cannot be demanded through arrogance." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "It must be earned through integrity." Every person listening could feel the weight behind those words. Judge Judy was no longer simply speaking to Karen. She was speaking to everyone watching. To every person who believed mockery was strength, to every person who confused noise with intelligence, to every person who thought tearing others down somehow made them powerful. Karen lowered her eyes briefly. For the first time all day, she had no sarcasm left, no clever remark, no insult, only silence. And somehow that silence spoke louder than anything she had said before, Judge Judy continued calmly. "A degree alone does not make someone honorable," she explained. "Titles do not create wisdom. Prestige does not create justice." Her voice remained firm but controlled. "What matters is what a person chooses to do with the opportunities they are given." The audience listened carefully. "Some people use education to lift others up," Judy said. "Others use it only to elevate themselves." Then she looked directly toward Karen again. And that difference is what defines character. Karen swallowed hard but still refused to completely surrender. "You act like you're perfect," she muttered quietly. Judge Judy shook her head immediately. "No," she answered. "Perfection has nothing to do with this." The room stayed silent. "I have made mistakes in my life," she admitted openly. "Everyone has. But the difference is that experience teaches humility." She leaned slightly forward. "Arrogance teaches nothing." Those 4 words struck harder than any insult exchanged during the entire confrontation. Several people in the audience nodded quietly. Even the reporters seemed more focused on listening than writing. Judge Judy's voice softened slightly, but the authority behind it never disappeared. "You came into this courtroom believing authority could be mocked into weakness," she told Karen. "But true authority does not depend on applause, fear, or status." She pointed lightly toward the bench. "It survives because it is built on consistency, honesty, and service." Karen looked away. The fight had left her completely. Judge Judy then delivered the final lesson that would later spread across television clips, headlines, and social media across the country. "The loudest voice in the room is not always the strongest one," she said calmly. A pause filled the courtroom. "Sometimes the strongest voice," she looked directly at Karen, "is the one that never loses control." The silence afterward was overwhelming. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, because everyone understood the moment they had just witnessed. Karen's insults had vanished almost instantly. But Judge Judy's words would remain long after the cameras stopped rolling. When the court session finally ended, the contrast was unforgettable. Karen's mockery had collapsed into humiliation and silence. Judge Judy's response had transformed into something larger than a comeback. It became a reminder that respect cannot be stolen through arrogance, that credibility cannot be erased by mockery, and that authority built through truth, integrity, and years of service will always stand taller than noise. As people slowly exited the courtroom, one thing had become painfully clear to everyone watching. Judge Judy had not merely defended her degree, she had defended the meaning behind it. And in doing so, she reminded the world exactly why her name still carried a level of respect that no insult could ever destroy.